Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see this room so full. It's fuller than last year when this session was happening, so this is very good news. Some recurrent guests sitting here, so welcome back. So we are here to talk about an issue that is very close to our heart and should be close to the heart of everyone, that if it's not yet, which is protecting the climate vulnerable. So we know today that nearly half of the world's population is severely affected by increasingly dangerous climate change events. And it's not me saying this. This is the IPCC 2022 report. So climate change is not the only threat. Today we face a triple planetary crisis of climate disruption, biodiversity loss, pollution. If we do not avert this interconnected crisis, we will jeopardize the well-being of multiple generations. So think about those yet to be born. We're thinking about ourselves, our kids, but thinking the long term. So we know this by now. So we had some political wins last year with COP27, reaching breakthrough agreements in loss and damage funds just for vulnerable countries, that the main topic we're talking here. At COP15, we also had a landmark agreement for biodiversity framework, but we still need to transform words into action. And we need to do that very swiftly. So how to begin thinking creatively about what it means to be climate resilient, geographically, economically, culturally, in the face of these increasing climate threats, thinking about the people that are there at the front line suffering already. So last May, I had the honor to be also here moderating another session in this forum on precisely the topic of how to turn words into action. We heard from powerful, like a group of, similar to this one, powerful messages. And there were only young people at that stage. And we have the opportunity to go back to that conversation, but now with an intergenerational perspective, with a group of youth activists, but also leaders. And I think this is a conversation that just needs to continue and to be very frequently, just not only here. So we have one person that was here with us last year, Helena Gualinga. She's here with this group again. So Helena is the co-founder of Indigenous Youth Collective of Amazon Defenders from Ecuador. We have Omid Nouripour, party co-leader of the Alliance in 90, the Greens. Omid is from Germany. We have, to all of them, they're all amazing, yes. We have Jade Hameister, a polar explorer and environmental advocate from Australia. We have Nicole, thank you. We have Nicole Keller, managing director of GreenUp, Switzerland. She's actually from Holland, but is based here in Davos. We have also Dangour, director for climate and health at the Wellcome Trust from the United Kingdom. So as a reminder, if you'd like to share about what's happening here today, please use the hashtag @WEF23 and @OpenForum23 for all social media channels. At the end here, we're going to have 20 minutes for Q&A, so think about what you want to ask for this amazing group of people here. So to start, I'd go back to Helena, who was the first one to be sitting. And I think, Helena, as you sat here not long ago, we saw some progress, but as you're saying, is it enough? Are words turning into action? I would like to hear what's your take on that, but also what you're up to right now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Helena Gualinga. I'm 20 years old, part of the youth collective of Amazon Defenders in Ecuador. I come from an indigenous community called Sarayaku of the Quechua people. And we have a long history of fighting against big oil and also of being able to kick out big oil from our territories to maintain our territories intact from extractivism. So I think in terms of what we spoke about last year, we spoke about these different threats that indigenous territories are facing across the world and also in the Amazon. And to make it simple, very little has changed. We can see that on paper we have the loss and damage fund that came out of COP27, the COP15 agreement in Montreal that shows progress for biodiversity, but unfortunately until now, it's only been on paper, and we are not seeing the changes on ground. What we need to be seeing on the ground is the end of fossil fuel expansion, the end of the mining front on our territories, and to make sure that indigenous territories and indigenous rights are respected. This year, we've seen an increase in mining, both legal mining and illegal mining. Both are targeting indigenous territories and violating indigenous rights. And this is really, really important in this conversation. This is fueled by the green transition. And let's not forget that indigenous territories are the ones that are going to suffer from the green transition. Because if we ask ourselves, where are all the minerals for all the electric cars, for to keep upholding the lifestyle that has been led in the global north, where is that going to come from? Because the only resources that are left, they are under indigenous territories. Most of the resources that are left are under indigenous territories. So we are again going to be the victims of extractivism and of predatory activities in our territories. And because of this, and because of the state of, we're in our territories, it's really, really hard to stay optimistic, to be honest, because as the effects of climate change are increasing, they're coming in forms of floods, in drought. A couple of years ago, 80% of my community was washed away by floods, and this year instead we were seeing drought. The impacts on the ground are going to become worse and worse and worse. And therefore, we also created this letter together with activists Greta Thunberg, Vanessa Nakate, and Luisa from Germany. It's called a cease and desist letter to call on big oil CEOs to stop exploiting oil. We know that they knew decades ago what the impacts of oil exploitation would have on the world and what impacts it would have on climate. They knew exactly what they're doing, and it's their responsibility to make sure that we can stop climate change today as well. I'll leave it there.
You made very important points, but we need you optimistic. And I'll turn to Omid, because I think Helena mentioned something that we have to tackle together. As I said, we're in this triple planetary crisis. When you look into climate disruption, then the green transition, we also have to look into nature and into circularity. So how, as a politician from the Green Party in Germany, needing to really push a green transition, how are you facing, let's say, the complexity, the issues as a whole? And what would you say to Helena when she comes with these concerns?
Thank you very much for having me. First, I think it's hard to understand for people in the global north how people, especially the super vulnerable groups, are suffering from that, what's going on. So it's definitely important to keep the dialogue, and I'm very happy that you set that up, and I fully understand and I fully agree with the statement that it should be frequently and not just in one summit. Second, there had been some institutional progress in COP27, but now it's about implementation. And for the implementation, for example, of the facility, loss and damage facility, we need two things. First one is money, much more money, and the second one is democracy, because implementation always is local. And when we talk about local structures and how they implement, it's always much more effective when it comes to democracies. Now, coming to the first issue, the question of money, and it's going to be $100 billion a year. And there are a lot of researchers telling us that this is definitely far too small, to be 2 trillions, they say. So this is absolutely necessary, not only for tackling the damages we are producing and we produce as a global north, but also definitely for doing researches, for having more innovations when it comes to to the green transition, we need substitutes for that, what is producing harms in these days. And just taking the quick fixes is not enough, because the quick fixes is producing, as we just heard, that the next harm. And this is why it's important to have a mindset of innovation also, but definitely having a push for innovation, and having our minds where the people are suffering the most. We produce that, and this is about us to of course try to keep the first pillar, which is shrinking, preventing climate crisis, but of course helping to adopt, and the third pillar now being fulfilled and being implemented, which is hard enough to get after China, for example, now being part of the funders, as we saw in COP27.
Wonderful. We're going to go definitely back.
If I may,
Yeah,
you asked me what's the proper answer. Sorry, there is no proper answer. Mm-hmm. The only proper answer is we have to speed everything up. We are definitely, it's too small, too late, and then we have to speed everything up.
I totally agree. And because you touched on the point of democracy, I'll go to Nicole, because I think that's a question that she's trying to address. So, Nicole, you're very passionate about sustainable development, as I think lots of people here in the room, and you're now empowering people in Switzerland to act sustainably. So, the power of the people. So, tell us about your work and how also you would respond to Helena and Omid.
Right. So our organization has as its motto, less is more. And we live in the richest country, well, one of the richest countries in the world. And so I feel, yes, we have an obligation, but it's also not that difficult to act. So that's what we're trying to kind of bring across through the different projects and workshops that we do. We work with companies, but we also do really grassroots projects, like creating a sustainable passport through which you can kind of discover sustainability in your region. And I just think it's really important, as you guys said, like that here we have very much power to kind of influence and like change our lifestyles, and it can be fun and it can be easy, and that's what we're trying to bring across in very hands-on ways. So an example of what we do is, for example, also around all the events that are happening in Davos, is that we're trying to bring resources back in a loop, so to give any excess resources that are being created back to local community, to projects, to people. And I think it's here where we need to start making the change, but I fully agree with you. I think people are not aware enough in their everyday life that they are having so much impact on people in the South. And I think we can combine it. We need to have more attention for that, but we also can do it for ourselves, because I really do think that less is more, and we're all kind of looking for a way out of our stressy lives. And I think there is a plus to leading a more simple life, actually. So when you, for example, go to work by bike, then you can really enjoy the nature around. You are less stressed. You have no impact on the environment, like as with a car. So I think there are many things that can actually make us happy and also facilitate this change.
Thank you, Nicole. And since we are in the mountaintop, I would love to also listen from Jade, who's a polar explorer, has an extraordinary journey. Tell us a bit about your insights. What have you been seeing in the journeys that you're undertaking?
Thank you, Ilona. I will just tone it down a little bit. But for some context, became the youngest person to ski to the North and South Poles and across Greenland when I was 16. And I set out to complete this journey when I was 14. And at that age, I didn't have much of a perspective for climate change and the impacts that we are having as humans. But the almost 80 days that I spent in these regions really opened my eyes to the impact we are having and just how beautiful and fragile these places are. Some examples: on the way to the North Pole when I was 14, the sea ice, which we needed to land a plane on to start the expedition, kept breaking up because of warm weather. So we had 2 weeks of delays. There were conversations about the season, almost being cancelled, which in seasons to follow it has been, which is unprecedented and really quite sad. The following year, when I was 15, at the beginning of our Greenland expedition, the ice had retreated so far from the coast that we were forced to physically carry, each of our sleds weighing between 80 and 100 kilograms over, rocks to the closest point of ice, which was over 1 kilometre from where we were dropped off. We had extensive ice melt climbing up the west coast, which consumed, the entire first and second days of the expedition. Again, we had conversations about, whether we would actually reach the other side in time. And then at the middle of the expedition, at the top of the ice cap at, over 2,000 metres above sea level, we were stuck in a blizzard and we got rain in the middle of Greenland, which I think is insane. And then the end of that year in Antarctica, it was quite a different experience. We had, the worst weather on record, days in which temperatures dropped to -50, and I think that was deceiving in a way because I soon learnt that, the ice around the coastline of Antarctica is melting rapidly. The warmer oceans are eating away at the underside of the continent. So it is all really scary and really opened my eyes. And I think, as likely the only person of my generation to have had the privilege of that first-hand experience, I feel, now a very deep emotional connection to those places and a responsibility to help protect them. And I think, obviously, my generation will inherit the challenges of climate change and the decisions of today's leaders. We just have to demand a platform from which we can still achieve a positive outcome.
Yes, no, that's not a joke. So we're seeing everywhere. So I think just to add to the setting the scene, which it's not about creating, let's say, total despair. It's about acting. And let's make sure we're here to just really turn what we're learning into action. I would like also to go to Alan, because Alan has a very interesting work. He's been dedicating his life to research the nexus between climate and health. Can you tell us why?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me onto this fantastic panel. And I have to say, the opening comments of Helena and Jade are hugely sobering. I come from I work at the Wellcome Trust, and the Wellcome Trust is a major UK charity which seeks to support research and science to solve the urgent health challenges of our time. And clearly, the climate crisis is a fundamentally catastrophic health crisis, which will shape public health around the world and is already shaping public health, health of the most vulnerable populations catastrophically at the moment. So what are the links between, my career, I've been an academic for 20 years, and it became abundantly clear about 10 years into my academic life that I could continue being an academic and become the world expert on something really, really tiny that nobody cares about. Or I could step back and say, let's use academia for what it's there for, which is to bring people together, to work at the intersections between different disciplines and different sectors, and to drive innovation. And to use that innovation and that insight and that new science and that new evidence to shape and support policy. So it became clear about 10 years ago that that would be the direction, that should be the direction I should take. It's not a massive brainwave on my behalf, it just happened. But it happened in a really exciting way, which meant that we brought together researchers who previously never spoke to each other, climate scientists and food, people who work on food, people who work on health in other areas, brought them all together and say, hey, look at this, look at what's happening to global health. The major driver of all of global health is climate change. And when we think about the links between climate and health, we think about it in three different pathways. So the direct pathway, And we'll all have experienced this. This summer in Europe was the hottest summer ever. So the direct pathways between climate and health are things like heat and extreme weather events like floods and droughts that Helena mentioned. So those are directly affecting the health of people every single day. Then there are the ecosystem or the nature-mediated pathways, which will be things like the production of food. So in many parts of the world, it is going to be too hot to grow food or too dry to grow food. And those parts of the world will therefore suffer from significant shortages in food availability. And we've seen, of course, Madagascar suffered last year what the UN called the first ever climate famine. And many parts of the Horn of Africa last year are still suffering, in fact, from significant food shortages. So the other, of course, ecosystem-mediated pathways are things like the spread of infectious disease. As the environment changes, so mosquitoes carrying diseases like dengue and malaria travel to different parts of the world. And we will be seeing malaria and dengue and other very nasty diseases in parts of the world that have never seen them before, or certainly not in our history. So these are, and of course, the other massive ecosystem-mediated pathway between climate change and health is the impact on our mental health. And we're really only beginning to scrape the surface there. And there is no health without mental health, as my mental health colleagues repeatedly remind me. And we see it's a two-directional pathway. Number one, young people are petrified about the future, and that is having a substantial impact on their mental health. And number two, the way the environment is changing, especially in those places with the most vulnerable communities, has a dramatic impact on the mental health of those populations, typically indigenous groups. And then, of course, the third pathway between climate change and health are the pathways that are socially mediated. So that means things like migration, things like conflict, things like the breakdown of society, because climate change makes the place you live in, your home, makes that place unlivable. So when that happens, of course, there are substantial impacts on health. So there are so many ways in which climate change affects health. And the evidence we are seeing that is now being generated with support from many philanthropies around the world and research funders is that the impacts are absolutely catastrophic. And the thing about climate change is it's physics. And therefore we know very well, and really to a great deal of accuracy, what the temperature is going to be like in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years' time, what the rainfall patterns are going to be like. And we can therefore project what it's likely to do to health of populations. And the evidence we are seeing is now really scary. And therefore there must be urgent action to drive forward an agenda which says the climate crisis is a health crisis, and if we don't recognize it now, we are in a really dangerous place.
Well, I think it's so important to link the issues so people understand. Some people won't maybe just pay attention to climate because they think it's too far from them, but health, everyone depends on that. So I think it's very important that you understand the intersections. And I couldn't agree more on your comment on academia, and just that's what we should be doing. And because you touched on so many fronts, I would like to ask Helena to comment. How are you seeing your community already dealing with all these issues that you touched? Alan just reiterated. How are you creating a path to resilience in a moment that we know that you're already facing the disruptions and of course, the worst impacts that are yet to come, but they're already there?
I think when we're talking about being vulnerable to climate change, we're forgetting that indigenous people and people on the ground are first off vulnerable to the extractive industries that are causing climate change, such as the oil industry. We're firstly suffering from the consequences of those. In neighboring communities, there are oil spills, children that are poisoned by oil in the water, by drinking oil in the water. I think the resistance of indigenous communities against that is the first sign of resilience and of resistance against extractivism and against climate change. But we're also seeing that we are in a need of adapting to this new reality. what will the Amazon rainforest look like in not even 10 years? What will it look like in 5 years? How will we find food security in the Amazon rainforest when the weather patterns are changing, when there are months that we do not see rain anymore in the Amazon rainforest? How can we adapt to that? And I think especially my community has been a really, really leading community in that sense, because we're creating something that is called life plans. Life plans so that we can focus on all the different important topics to us, such as education, such as healthcare, such as food security in times of crisis. How do we face all those issues, and how can we plan for the future? But in order for all indigenous communities to do so, we need support. We need support, and we need funding to come directly to our communities. But right now, no resources are going into indigenous communities. We're seeing them have investments being made into climate technology. We're seeing them going into different funds, but we're not seeing them reach the ground where indigenous communities are actually the ones putting in all effort to protect biodiversity and to protect these natural spaces that are mitigating climate change directly. We know that in order to curb climate change, in order for climate change to mitigate it, we actually need to protect forests and waters, bodies of water that are the mitigators of climate change. That's the most important part in order to fight climate change. But we also need to think about why are even our countries exploiting these natural resources? Why is my country still exploring for oil? And because our hands are tied. We have extremely big external debts, and we need to deal with that. We need to deal with that in order for our countries to stop exploring oil. Right now, it's more profitable for my country, for our countries, to exploit natural resources than it is to protect it. And how can we change that? How do we actually give value to nature? And that's a question that world leaders or these big business people need to deal with. And I think I cannot leave without saying this, and I think this is really, really important to also kind of building on what you all have been saying. It's really important. It's really hard to understand from the global north what's going on in the global south, what the consequences feel like in the global south. But I do want to highlight that right now there is coal that they want to explore for coal here in Europe. And we have people that are fighting that, young people that are fighting that, standing up. And if you ask yourselves, who are the people that actually care? It's them. It's the people in the global north that are actually taking action in solidarity with everyone in the global south who is suffering from climate change. And that they need international solidarity, and the climate movement really, really needs international solidarity so that we can make sure that these projects are stopped. And I'll also mention, Ilona, and I've spoken to you a lot about this, the reason why we even protect our forests in the Amazon and indigenous communities, why we're so keen about it. It has to do with the way that we view the forest, right? And in my community, we call it Kausaksacha. Translated into English, that means the living forest. We see everything in the forest as a living being. We see the mountains, the lagoons, the rivers and waters as living beings that are equal to us, that deserve mutual respect. And therefore, you can find on indigenous territories that we have preserved these territories, because these are living beings with equal rights to us. And that is the philosophy, and that is the mindset that should be in every single person's mind. Because if we do not change our mindset, we will still look at forests and see a resource to exploit, another thing to make profit of.
Thank you, Helena. You touched, I'm here thinking about the innovation question, because both Omid and Alan touched on innovation. And when we see, this North and South dialogue, we see that there will be, and there is a lot of investment in the North for new tech and so on, which is much needed. But how can this innovation also be accessible for, the communities on the ground, such as Helena's and so many others? Do you have insights on knowing what is going on today? How best can we include them in the, let's say, the co-creation and also in the accessibility of those innovations?
I think there are few things we have, not a few things, but a very, very, very crucial things we have to change in our mindsets. First one is, if we say that it's a humankind's task to tackle the climate crisis, it means that there has to be, of course, there has to be know-how transfer. Those countries who need it and who are not able or capable to afford research on their own. Second, we have to understand that helping the global South is our interest. It's of course a question of tackling the climate crisis. It's of course a core question of climate justice, but it's our interest also. I have no idea if there's someone here from Pakistan. If please correct me if I'm wrong, but we have all of these yearly, once a century floods in Pakistan. This year, 33 million people has been affected there. What that, everybody can imagine what that means for the economy of a country like Pakistan. A country like Pakistan having such a hard and unstable economy is not good for the interests of those countries who want to go in and trade, have trade with it. Just one very, very, very small and tiny example, which is showing that this is our interest also to have, to help and then to assist that these countries have the capability to be stable and tackle and then bring up the solutions they have themselves. If I may, I would love to come back to the democracy argument also, because I fully agree with everything about what has been said about money, and it's the money we do not spend now, we're going to spend later much more, obviously. But let me give you three very brief examples on the question of democracy. Renewables, which is the first thing I have in my mind when we talk about this. Renewables are decentral, or of course implemented if there is local support and local acceptance for that. Therefore, you need discussions, local discussions. This is what democracies are about. Second, we have this harmful and painful backlash, fossil backlash, not only but especially in my country, because a lot of homework had not been done in the past because of the Russian aggression in these days. And the bizarre thing is Russia is one of the most countries on earth being affected by the climate crisis. And the country there is, and the government of the country is just not cares. And this is what non-democracies are about when it comes at the end to such a decision. And the third one is, you just mentioned the life plans and the question of resilience. Once again, this just can be built up from the grassroots level. Therefore, you need space for people who can think, who can be creative, who can think about local solutions. Therefore, it's about democracy also to be pushed.
So knowledge, finance, accountability, democracy. So
Sure.
Alan, please, just your
Could I just comment on innovation?
Please,
on
please.
innovation, I mean,
Yes.
I think it's often what we do, but it's not hugely helpful to think that innovation can only come from the global north. And I think it's really, really, really important, especially when we talk about things like climate change, adapting to environmental change. You know, we live so I live in London. My environment is entirely protected by the house, the central heating, the windows, the whatever. If you're living in the forest, and I did that for my PhD for a year and a half in the Amazon, you experience the environment in an entirely different way, on a very day-to-day way. And so there are innovations that come from those communities, and they're really, really important. So Wellcome is committed to funding research groups based in low and middle-income countries who understand the local context, who understand the local needs, and who can deliver the evidence at a local level to support climate action. Because the ideas cannot come from London, many of the ideas are based locally. We've also supported work on food systems. So food systems, of course, major impact of food on the environment, but also the environment, as I mentioned, is affecting the way plants grow. But many traditional indigenous crops grow in a variety of climates and are adapted to a changed environment. So, and that knowledge is in the heads of the indigenous people, and it's very arrogant of the global north to think that we can come up with all the solutions and we'll eventually hand it down to the indigenous groups, when in fact many of those innovations are there and are known and need to be really recognized and brought forward.
I couldn't agree more. So I want to hear from Jade, because you ran recently a survey with youth. And so can you tell us about that, and also your partner in this survey?
Yes, so the Villars Institute, who I'm working with and we run this youth survey with, is a non-profit foundation with the goal of accelerating the transition of the global economy to net zero. It's set up as a platform for systemic change and intergenerational collaboration. I'm working at the moment as their youth advisor, so I'm conducting research on how youth perceive the impact and importance of 6 different global issues on their work or career and daily lives in the next 5 to 10 years. We just released the survey to the first group of fellows of the Institute. There were over 100 of them, aged between 13 and 19. And with this, we really aim to, shape public opinion by highlighting the importance of these issues across generations. And what we found from the first cohort was that, all this data skews towards them thinking that these issues, are extremely, or at least very and extremely important. The 6 issues, including things like systems leadership, net zero and nature positive economy, energy transition. And we found that, roughly 70% of this group of 100 fellows believe that these issues will be important in the next 5 to 10 years in their work or career. And then we also asked the same question in terms of the impact on their daily lives. And interestingly, it was the exact same response. 70% found that these issues will be impactful in their daily lives in the next 5 to 10 years, which I think is interesting because, maybe in previous generations, there wasn't the same emphasis placed on the impact of global issues on daily lives. So, we should definitely acknowledge that and work with it. And we plan on, conducting this research annually in years to come. So we look forward to sharing that.
I think this is very important. Just before opening to the floor, Nicole, do you see this impact on awareness in your day-to-day work with citizens?
What do you mean exactly?
So people are more aware of the problem and the impacts. Mm-hmm. Like, do you see that this is transforming their action? Do you see this in the work you do?
Yes, I see a willingness to change. I see an interest to change, but I also see people doubting how to do it. And that's where we try to come in to show it can actually be positive and easy. And there are many ways you can just start. For example, with a minimal waste lifestyle, creating your own products. And so I see it, but I also see that people continuously look for confirmation, support in making that transition, and that's where we try to come in. Yeah.
So, would love to hear your questions. So, are there questions from the audience, please? So, should we just get someone with the mic, or we? Yep. So there are many. So we'll take. Can we take 3 and get back to you, and then so we listen to more people, please. We'll get to you all. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. An outstanding panel. Thank you to everybody. Special thanks to Alan in the first instance for raising mental health. I think climate and mental health is often overlooked. And I think it was also touched upon in a few other areas. Helena, I think you're absolutely right not to feel optimistic. Ilona, I think she has every right not to feel optimistic at times, so long as that pessimism is channeled in the right way. And I think often it is. But to come back to the mental health thing, I think a lot of young people, and Jade, I don't know if this was also part of the studies that you've done, but eco-anxiety is a huge thing amongst the young. I think a lot of young people are channeling that just as much as they channel their pessimism in the right way. But I'd love to hear maybe just one line from the panelists of what you'd say to those young people who maybe have, because to my mind, I'm not a mental health expert, I work with legislators in a multilateral sphere a lot of time on climate change. But to my mind, anxiety is debilitating. You struggle to do things when you have anxiety. So what's one line you'd say to young people who maybe feel a bit immobilized by their eco-anxiety? What would you say to them to get them out fighting the good fight? Thank you.
Let's get some more questions here in the middle, please. So, there, I see you.
Thank you very much. This is a question for Alain again. First, to comment, of course, we cannot, I mean, the link between human health and climate change is clear, and we have to act very fast. We have indicators that have shown that climate change had also an effect on wildlife and the loss of millions of species in the very recent past. And we have shown also that this acts as indicators of human health. The loss of biodiversity is an indicator and could help to assess human health. And I would like to hear about your thoughts about that. Thank you.
So let's get from, okay, like we'll get these two more and then we'll go back to the panel and try another round.
Thank you, always a pleasure. First, I want to touch on a point that Omid mentioned, because people may hear $200 billion and think that it's a lot of money. But for context, the collective increase in net income from the world's oil and natural gas producers from 2021 to 2022, not revenue, but net income, was $2 trillion. So I couldn't agree more that there is a need for more money and that it's out there and needs to be reprioritized. But going back to a point that Helena mentioned, I'm curious to hear the panel's thoughts on whether you see the mining of metals, precious metals, to create more sustainable mechanisms of energy creation, because we need energy for transport, to heat our homes, for refrigeration, and so many others. Is the mining of that to create these mechanisms a necessary temporary evil, or is there a more attractive alternative?
Thank you, please.
So thank you for all the information and statements you have given. So I liked very much what the two ladies said, because they bring in some emotions, and that's what I feel is really missing in all the discussions, because I feel it's really very much technical when we're talking about sustainability and climate change. And what I'm missing is really that it is by heart that we are committed to improving the state of the world. And that is where I learned. So I'm coming from the healthcare business. I was working 30 years in healthcare, and I became a shaman, a modern day shaman. And I learned from the Inca traditions, and I learned, and I feel now, that we have Mother Earth as a living planet, and the trees are living beings, and so on. And I think when we not be able to change that and to change the mindset of the people, and especially the stakeholders and politicians, we will never change really something. Because it's really that you need to feel it. You need to make your decisions by heart. And then we have a really more stable future. So my question is, what can we do to bring more people into that I see the Earth as a living planet and I act accordingly?
Thank you, that's very important. So that's why we hear from these amazing young people here through like frontliners. So would you like to comment just in the order, maybe starting with Omid, the question
Sure.
that you feel?
I think I would like to take two questions. First one is, isn't that a lot of money, and how do we get that? Also in this conference, I had a couple of rounds where companies asked for and elaborated their vision of a carbon-free future very soon, and then asked for financial branch to help. The financial branch said, well, it's about the politics to give us the framework, and I agree with that. But, and this is maybe the bridge to the emotional question, I'm from Frankfurt. Half of my former classmates are bankers today. Sorry for that. No, they are cool people, and they have children. Yeah. And when we discuss that, they know what's going on. Of course they know what's going on. We have a taxonomy in the EU now. We were fighting all the time, saying that gas is sustainable, which we do not believe in. When I talk to these people in the banks in Frankfurt, they know that this is not the real, the right future investment for their companies, because they know that we have to fade it out. We have to defossil. There is no alternative to that. We do not defossil, we're going to die. And okay, we won't die maybe, but the future of our children will be much worse than ours. So, of course, it's absolutely necessary that these arguments calculated and by math are brought to the people who decide that. And to be honest, of course, this is a high emotional discussion, and it should be. I think we get my branch by just announcing and naming the interests. These are maybe not that emotional, but we do not tackle, and we do not speed up, and we do not spend money. We have to. The sum of money we have to, and this is much more than we are doing in these days. It must be much faster than we are acting in these days. We will fail, and we will lose our freedom, and we will lose our welfare and everything else. So it's to be honest, you can go from that side and sign. The result is the same. We are not good enough yet. It is too small and too slow, and we have to change all of these things.
Thank you, Nicole.
So I would like to comment on what you said about your bankers. So we did a workshop a few months ago with a group of bankers, which was really hands-on, like how can you change to a zero-waste lifestyle? So that was on the person itself. But I think that people have those both roles, right? And I think that triggered them tend to also start to see how within their company they could, push this. So yeah, I'm very optimistic that we all have the capacity to make changes, and it will be very important, as we heard, for nature, for climate, for people in vulnerable communities, but it can also bring us something, and there we touch on the emotion. I also think that, when you start to feel it, when you experience that things can also be positive for yourself, I think then it becomes also easier to do it. And I wanted to comment on the question, what do you say to young people, right, when they are not seeing it so positive? Well, I try to kind of bring across my positivity, but that's not enough, I think. Just do. I find that difficult to answer, but I see it, we have also a GreenUp here in Davos, and the local Fridays for Future group, they meet there also, and we talk about that. And I just feel that there is hope, and we cannot just be stuck. So just start where your passion is or where your interest lies, I would say. Is it in nature, going out there much more, taking other people out there, or is it in mobility? That's all good. Try to find your path into this.
I think it's on us, everyone. So, Alan, your take.
Thank you. 4 really great questions. Thank you very much. The mental health question is really interesting, and eco-anxiety is something that is now clearly right at the top of the agenda. The question is whether it's top of the agenda everywhere around the world, and in different communities will experience the impact of climate change on mental health in different ways. And we in Wellcome have now just commissioned a series of global dialogues which will take place around the world to understand how different communities in different parts of the world experience the link between climate change and mental health. I've got 2 boys, they're in their late teens now. I come home having been inundated with unbelievably depressing data, but I don't tell them. So, because that's not helpful. And so they've got to have hope. There's got to be hope. And the fact that we have Jade and Helena, and I was on a panel the other day with Vanessa McCarthy and of course Greta Thunberg and others, speaking. And it's not privilege. You're here. You're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be here to tell us and to lead what happens next. And I think that's really exciting for young people to see that it's not just, this morning I was with John Kerry. He's amazing, but he's not going to make the decisions. He's not going to be here forever. And we need to have younger voices, and I think they're here, and I think that's really exciting. Climate change has been catastrophic for biodiversity loss, absolutely catastrophic. Our farming practices are catastrophic for biodiversity. So many things are catastrophic for biodiversity. So that direction is clear. The other direction, the importance of biodiversity for health, there is still a huge amount of research that needs to happen. It's obvious, emotionally, that I want to look out of the window and see a biodiverse field of a meadow of flowers and butterflies and birds. That's obvious. But I think we still need to do much more research. I think it's an area of really exciting research because I think there are big areas to explore. Again, at the borderlands, at the intersection between two communities that previously haven't spoken.
May I just two few words on that? We had this biodiversity COP in Montreal, and it could be a milestone. But maybe we could start talking about all of the summits, that they are important, but everything is about implementation. And implementation is costful.
Yes.
So then just the last two, which I'm going to combine, because I think they're connected. So the question about mining. We mine for cobalt, and we don't recognize that cobalt mining has a catastrophic impact if it's local cobalt mining, or even if it's large-scale cobalt mining. It's really horrific. There's now very nice evidence, in fact, on the impact it has on the health of women and children. Especially, it has substantial negative impacts on fetal growth and fetal health. So, but that's evidence that's relatively new and relatively recently identified. So the reason I'm saying this is there are trade-offs here. So you could go down the line and cobalt mine and move the community out, and that would be horrific, and there would be all sorts of problems, of course. But without that data, you can't, understanding the broader impacts of what we're trying to achieve, understanding biodiversity impacts, understanding health impacts, bringing all of that evidence together, it's very difficult to make the right choice. And we need that evidence in order to make sure that when we lead with our heart, we have evidence to support that action. And I've worked in government in the UK and led with my heart. I get thrown out of the room very, very quickly. I go in with a piece of evidence. It only needs to be a very small piece of evidence, published in a high-quality journal by some really clever people, but it just needs to be a small amount of evidence, and often that will change the dialogue.
I think transparency for that data is important, so it can change. So, Helena, please.
Yeah, I think something that is really important to address is what you said about indigenous knowledge, and I think it's really, really important to kind of have indigenous knowledge as central, but without appropriating that knowledge. And I think it's really, really important to be careful with the words that are being used when we're talking about indigenous knowledge. Words such as shaman, because I think it's really hard to understand for people what that actually means. My grandfather was a medicine man, and he studied his entire life from even before he was born. He was chosen to practice this medicine. So I think it's really important to be aware of that and to be careful with the words that we choose, because it can many times it does not reflect what we are trying to say or what we mean, and to make sure that indigenous cultures are actually respected as intellectual property of indigenous communities. Really important when we're talking about preservation of cultures in our territories. And secondly, when you said about mining, if there are better alternatives, I think what we have experienced in the Amazon when it comes to oil many times and I've said this many, many times before, we've explored for oil in the name of development. And I've told this story probably many times, but I always saw the word development as something negative until I actually started speaking Spanish and English, when I understood what it was supposed to mean. And I think that's also what we're looking at when we were talking about mining and sustainability, because now mining is being done in the name of sustainability again. So it's the same concept, it's the same predatory system that is exploiting indigenous lands. So how can we actually, and what we were talking about, how can we actually be ambitious and more ambitious and find solutions that will not violate human rights? Because what activity will we permit, and how will we justify human right violations in the name of sustainability and development, and to continue and to uphold these systems?
Thank you, Helena. Not easy questions, but very necessary to hear from you. Jade, please.
I think to start to your question about mental health and the survey that we conducted, we did do a little bit of research into previous, youth climate surveys, and a lot of them were doom and gloom, and, young people feel upset and concerned and fear, and that's important, but we wanted to channel, that engagement of youth to really understand, what they are most concerned about, how they think these issues will impact their lives, to be able to influence, businesses and people with power to actually do something about it. I think it is scary. We are on an irreversible path now to 2 degrees warming. I think our best bet is to try and limit that warming to 1.5, if that's still even possible. But I am an optimist. I think, humanity has the capacity to take on any challenge. We got ourselves into this mess in the first place, so we can get ourselves out. And I think the most important thing for youth, and to your point, Nicole, the most important thing for youth that we can do is to really explore, our unique gifts and passions for the benefit of others. Not one of us has the same set of experiences or knowledge or interests. So to really channel that and be unique and be useful for the benefit of others. And secondly, to your point about changing our mindset and speaking with our heart and becoming one with nature, I think it's so important today with our youth, and we must encourage them to get outside, to get off TikTok, to be frank. And I think it's important because, we don't truly appreciate what we haven't directly experienced. And I've found that with my expeditions because, not everyone's going to have the privilege to explore those places. So we must, if we have that privilege, we must use our platforms to inspire and encourage others to get involved and make change. And I think to add to that as well, we must create compelling content that will engage youth and engage them to understand the risks and the importance of protecting, these beautiful places and our beautiful world.
Thank you so much. So time flies. We're almost out of time. So we hope that those here that will still have questions can just get these amazing speakers in the end. But I wanted just to say, we're talking about science, but also we spoke about heart. So how to align, our minds with our hearts. Final message to protect the climate vulnerable, to turn words into action. So very, very brief seconds on any insight that this panel gave you. Final message to this amazing audience here. So starting from you, Omid.
It's being one in nature is leading to the same result like reading the figures of economy or whatever. So, there are people who are not that affected by emotional calls call of nature. The end is the same. The end is we have to save this planet to save our freedom and the way we are living. And we are not good enough yet. We have to improve.
Thank you. Nicole?
So, I feel that you were talking about the word development. I think indeed we don't need growth or development. I really think less is more, and I'll leave it at that.
Alan, thank you.
I'd like to encourage everybody to engage in this debate. I mean, the key thing is we must talk about it. And I would like to encourage those of you that are interested in the links between climate and change and health, whether you're a scientist, whether you're a social scientist, whatever your background, to really think about the opportunity to ask some important questions about that link and develop some answers, the solutions that are desperately needed.
Thank you. Final message, Helena.
I think that indigenous conservation and stewardship of lands needs to be the priority and center of decision making, making sure that indigenous rights are respected, indigenous sovereignty is respected. It's been evidence that it's the most efficient way of protecting natural places, and that needs to be center of every decision making, but also that indigenous people are part of that decision making from the beginning to the end.
Thank you. Jade?
I hope to end on a positive note. I mean, I'm totally confident that my generation will have the technology, the passion, and the unified movement to make a meaningful difference. But I think it is up to the current generation of world leaders and leaders here at Davos to ensure that we still have a fighting chance.
Thank you so much. So my final message is engage with what you want to transform. So you're here, first step, so let's get into action. Thank you so much. Thank you to these wonderful speakers. Thank you to all of you that are also watching us.